Thus, on the global economic stage, we have emerged to the critical crossroads, which resemble in many ways significant turning points of the human history. America is currently in the process of applying quantitative measures, sanctions, to the countries with which it has certain scores to settle, a type of economic warfare that may well have disastrous consequences which, besides undermining the status of the U.S. dollar in the world economy. Pursuant to these sanctions that are far-reaching and comprehensive in terms of both longevity and breadth, these sanctions are more of a symbol which transcends not only the objective of foreign policy instrumentality. They are in a way a double-edged sword in that, though they may be useful in pursuit of its immediate objectives, they are potentially damaging insofar as the greatest source of American strength, the ascendancy of the dollar in international commerce and money markets, is concerned. To drive home the purpose of this current strategy, though, it's crucial to first lay the ground on how the U.S. dollar has held a special place in the global economy since mid-1900s. This was culminated by the Bretton Woods Agreement early in 1944, which saw the U.S. dollar being the world's primary reserve currency, which has with enormous benefits to the United States, both economically and politically. This position has enabled U.S. to pay for its deficits conveniently, has lowered the interest rate, and has a huge say in the global financial system. Nonetheless, due to sanctions which has been put in place by the United States, this fundamentals had gradually started to erode. The nations close to such sanctions, as well as the ones fearing being sanctioned in the future, are gradually turning to the methods in trading internationally and storing funds bound to U.S. dollars. This is not merely a short-term kind of reaction, but it may well be the start of a long-term process that could alter the world financial architecture. India provides the best example for this emerging market. One of the world's fastest-growing major economies, India's direct trade and investment arrangements with Russia without involving the United States, dollar-edged international monetary system is noteworthy. This is not an outright move. It is a reflection of the growing trend among many nations, especially the emerging economies, to diversify their foreign exchange reserves and thus foreign exchange value transactions and structures away from the domain of the U.S. dollar, as well as the entire financial structures associated with it, as most are dictated by the Western institutions. This change is brought about by a number of reasons that include, for some nations, it's a thing of economic nationalism, getting a need to minimize exposure to U.S. monetary decisions and enemies lists. For others, it is a chance to enhance their own economic and/or geopolitical power by supporting other financial systems and their currencies in international commerce. Though the aforementioned increasing inclination in the consumption of personalized content has been ignited by the modern geopolitical conflicts, it does not lack any historical context. Indeed, among experts, it is widely believed that to analyze potential consequences that the current state of affairs may have, it is necessary to focus on the experience of other epochs that can be considered as critical in the development of economics. Two such moments stand out. The two important occurrences that happened in the year 1933 and 1971. In 1933, during the Great Depression, the then President of USA, Franklin D. Roosevelt, took a decision that would shift the relationship between U.S. dollar and gold significantly. In the future, Roosevelt signed the Executive Order 6102 on April 5, 1933, which required the citizens of the U.S. to surrender all their gold money in the form of gold coins and gold bullions, as well as gold certificates, in exchange for dollars at the rate of $20.67 ounce. This was part of the President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal, hence, was aimed at fighting deflation, enhancing the supply of money to boost the economy. The effect of this decision, therefore, cuts across the different sectors of life. It, for all practical purposes, brought an end to the domestic gold standard to the United States and granted the government more control over monetary policies. Although this policy measure was highly criticized at the time, it is now widely seen by economists as a highly appropriate for addressing the deflationary problem of the Great Depression. Let fast forward to August 15, 1971, which witnessed another historic speech of President Richard Nixon on the New World Order. In a speech that is popularly called the Nixon Shock, he made a proclamation that the U.S. will not be able to change its dollars for gold that has a fixed price, which ended the Bretton Woods system of monetary exchange. This was made due to a number of reasons, such as rise in the U.S. budget and trade deficits, as well as fears of dwindling gold reserves in the U.S. The first impact was the depreciation of U.S. dollar in foreign exchange markets, as well as in terms of gold. However, unlike what most people anticipated, including myself as I was working on New York Stock Exchange, right at large stock market did not fall. Instead, the market rallied. Namely, one can provide many parallels between these events and the contemporary period. In each of these respective cases, the views held when reference is made to the nature of money and its relation to actual bodies alter completely. It is also demonstrated how such changes may lead to certain outcomes that are counterintuitive, leaving aside that they underscore the global integration of financial systems. Such historical examples are important as allegories to what is currently taking place in the world. It's something that shows that in order to counter the economic pressure, the nations may change the notion of the currencies and the overall finance drastically. They also demonstrate that such shifts do not provoke reactions in the markets immediately, which are counterintuitive. Therefore, should we look beyond short-term movements in the market while studying impacts of policy changes? Moreover, these events highlight a recurring theme in economic history: the conflict of interest between a country's fiscal and economic independence from the rest of the world and the integrated world economy needs of the global financial market. Just like Roosevelt and Nixon made their decisions because of the economic conditions of their time, today's actions like countries trying to diversify away from the greenback can be seen as reaction to a multiversed, multipolar world economy. However, such comparisons should always be kept in mind while dissecting the current state of the global economy. They have importance for the overall interpretation of future tendencies and consequences of performed policies. In the next section, one will understand how such historical examples can be connected to the current state and what they might mean for the future of international finance. It is important to learn from the patterns of previous changes and learn about the possible consequences of the modern economical conditions. One of the most important things that one learns is the need to look for cycles in economic history. For example, in the Great Depression, which occurred in 1929 to 1939, we realized that poor monetary policies can result to disastrous economic calamities. This understanding has defined economic theory as well as policy formulation for a number of decades. It is such historical perspective that armed my investment management company, Bridgewater Associates, to forecast the 2008 financial meltdown. The 2008 crisis, which, as the Great Depression, is primarily a credit crisis that occurred when a credit bubble was burst, causing massive distress within the world economy. In realizing that the two events occurred after credit expansion, inflationary bubbles of asset price, and complacent regulation standards, we were able to forecast the economic upheaval. The first of these is the ability to learn from past events and the patterns that are witnessed, and be in a position to transfer that knowledge to the current world economies, thus making the global financial world more manageable. Thus, today, when the world undergoes changes and tensions between the leading nations grow, such lessons are especially important. The modern world is to a certain extent characterized by similarities to other periods of the active shift in history. Hence, there is a shift of economic power with the new members such as China, India, and other developing nations representing a teeming population with increased bargaining power rather than the old world players such as United States and some European nations where their economies are shrinking, especially due to aging population and high unemployment rates. This change in the structure of power relations raises the probability of different kinds of conflict situations. Despite the fact that a direct military conflict between the nuclear states cannot occur due to the fact that the nuclear arsenals will eliminate everyone, including the initiators of the conflict, we are witnessing signs of other forms of warfare. These are the trade wars, where countries use tariffs and other measures as weapons. Technological wars, as countries try to outdo each other in fields such as artificial intelligence and 5G networks. Geopolitical wars, especially in strategic areas such. It is important to learn that each of these forms of conflict may have severe impacts on market and economy of the global systems. Some of the negative impacts include: a trade war can lead to disruption of the supply chain, cost-push inflation, and slow growth rate. Technological rivalry can result in the evolution of splintered global standards, with concomitant relationship decline in key research and development disciplines. Thus, geopolitical processes are able to make the energy markets unstable and influence the existing trade routes. The potency of capital wars is that it can provoke fluctuations of the currency, shifts the interest rates, and affects the flow of investments. Here the focus shifts to the support of money flow in this growing global tensions and competition. Traditionally, when there is war or tension in any part of the world, most governments end up consuming more than they earn in terms of revenues. This is even more prevalent today when many states are struggling with their economic losses due to the coronavirus pandemic, while at the same time spending billions in certain fields such as technology and defense in order to remain relevant. When governments are subjected to such fiscal constraints, they turn to another avenue of holding more money supply, or in other words, producing more money. The advance of more money in circulation, but with no relative growth of the production of goods and services, commonly results to currency depreciation and higher levels of inflation. This we have observed time and again, leading to inflationary phases, such as witnessed through most of the 70s phase. The situation that we have today is quite similar to what we had in the 1970s in terms of witnessing high fiscal deficits, rising national debts, and emerging inflationary pressures are the signs of current economic era. As in the 70s, these factors are sure to force the investors into change and begin another hunt for the assets that can act as the inflation hedge or the cure to the problem of the devaluating currencies. Historically, nations have had two primary methods of dealing with excessive debt: pays it off with strong money and/or with weak money. The strong money policy involves preserving the power of the currency by tightening, as in the case of contractionary money supply, and reducing budget deficits. This can, however, maintain the purchasing power of the currency through controlling inflation, especially through manipulation of interest rates and reduction of spending, which in turn leads to economic depression. The second weak money concept means to actually permit or promote inflation in order to minimize debt measured in real terms. In the process, the nations have come to prefer this option, as has been witnessed in the events of 1933 and 1971. The tendency to support inflation than deflation has a social economic implication that affects the long-term planning and investment strategies. In today's world, we are witnessing the process of change of the status of the dollar as the key reference currency. This change is due to factors such as rising usage of sanctions by the United States, intensifying competition from new global economic giants, as well as technological solutions, bringing about new means of electronic currency and payments. There are also other forms of stores of value being floated in the market. For instance, there is the cryptocurrencies, there is the China digital yuan, and yet there is the gold, which is being floated in the market again. The following are the alternatives. These have various features and possible advantages over the conventional dollar-based system. Such possessions as cryptocurrencies can, for example, allow one to make transactions that are decentralized, borderless, and immune to government interference. That is, their digital yuan, under the control of the Chinese central bank, can provide a more effective system for foreign trade and payments, including within the region of China's expanding influence, where this diversification of monetary options could actually lead to this very reinvention of money, and hence the place of the digitization of global currency in the future of mankind and the world, in terms of nations and individuals. It is also possible that we are gradually witnessing transition to a more polycentric system of world money, in which none of the currencies plays a dominant role over the other, as it has been the position of the US dollars in the last few decades. The consequence of such a shift is obvious and can be considered as revolutionary. It may cause a shift in the structure of world gross domestic product, modifications in the processes of global trade, and which, in turn, presage challenges to the formulation of international monetary policy and to the regulation of the financial systems. Some of the G10 economies that have for long relied on the pound and the dollar might have to shift their positions, as some of the emerging market economies might witness new era of growth and power. It remains to wonder how the changes in the global economies can be managed and handled with a spirit of nation, investor, policymaker, or citizen. Looking at history, one could identify that shifts in the global monetary system might pose threats as well as challenges. One can only wonder whether those people who are aware of such patterns and are able to predict further developments in these fields are more equipped to make reasonable decisions in the world economy, which is likely to become even more complicated and interrelated. In any case, admittedly, dollar has been dominant for decades now. Yet, looking at the contemporary world economy, it is possible to state that the world can be on the verge of a shift. Therefore, based on the various deviations in the past, and in an effort to stay abreast of current changes, it is possible to predict the potentialities of the future economic climate. Whereas they are likely to remain volatile, diversification and appreciation of the dynamics of the international economy will be useful strategies in charting the future. Further into our discussion on how global currency is evolving, one needs to acknowledge the fact that currency goes beyond actually being a medium of exchange and unit of account. Money, especially the foreign exchange such as a US dollar, has a representation of economic strength, international diplomacy, and in some cases, pride of countries. The roles that the US dollar fulfills here are being questioned more and more on a world scale. There are multiple reasons why the United States and its policies are under this amount of scrutiny. Firstly, the national debt. Secondly, political polarization. And thirdly, there is rising competition from other major world powers. Let's examine each of these factors in detail. Growing national debt. The national debt of the United States has been rising steadily since the early 1980s. But in the recent years, the rate at which the national debt has been rising has been higher. As at 2024, the U.S. national debt reached $34.3 trillion, over 100% of the GDP. Such a level of debt leads to the vulnerable form of stability and value of the dollar in the forex markets. In the past, it has been observed that the countries having high debt-GDP ratio have had problems with the stability of the currencies. It is worth noticing that higher amounts of accumulated debts could lead the government to employ inflationary policies in order to decrease the real amount of provided debts. By causing a depreciation, in the view of international investors and trading partners, there can be erosion of confidence in use of the currency. Further, if the debt is high, then there are limitations on the capacity of a government to meet any shocks in the economy or invest in a future economy. This may adversely affect the country's growth outlook, and in turn, confidence in the country's currency. Political polarization, an element that has attracted attention from other nations as well as investors in the United States of America, is the rising political polarization. Intense polarization of parties means that policies hardly get passed, since the opposing parties are unlikely to agree on the best way to deal with deep-rooted economic problems. This polarization can manifest in several ways that impact the dollar's standing. A. Debt ceiling debates. Frequent and regular debates over the lifting of the debt ceiling in countries, particularly in U.S., make financial markets unpredictable. These debates are actually part of the political process in the United States, can be seen from the outside as a pathological process that destroys confidence in the dollar. B. Fiscal policy uncertainty. These distinct political fiscal policies Scalar differences in fiscal policy between political parties can result in large-scale shifting of tax and spending policies every election cycle. This inconsistency may be a problem for the long-term economic planning as well as for domestic as well as international users. C. International agreements. Hence, political polarization poses a major threat to the U.S. as it can hinder its capacity to sign international agreements that include the trade agreements. This may shake up its trade and business with other countries and therefore potentially alter the position of the dollar on the world stage. Emergence of competing economic powers. Emergence of competing economic powers. It has been threatened by the appearance of other economic leaders like China that poses indication of snubbing the U.S. dollar. That is why as these economies expand and contribute a bigger percentage in the volume of international exchange, there is a tendency to trade more using local currencies. For instance, there is China, which has been very keen on the process of internationalization of its currency, the renminbi RMB. With projects like the Belt and Road, creation of RMB clearing banks in other key financial hubs, and the emergence of the digital yuan all fall under China's plans for trying to get its currency used globally. Other emerging countries like India, Brazil, Russia are also planning for the options to internationalize their currencies and thus reduce the usage of the dollar. The appearance of such associations as BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and attempts made by these countries to develop new financial organizations and methods of payment are examples of such a tendency. The implications of changing currency dynamics. The implications of changing currency dynamics. These shifts in global currency dynamics have far-reaching implications for the world economy. These shifts in global currency dynamics have far-reaching implications for the world economy. Diversification of foreign exchange reserves. Diversification of foreign exchange reserves. Today it is becoming a global trend that central banks of different countries are slowly shifting from the dollar to other currencies in their forex reserves. Although dollar has always held this position, its proportion has gradually been reducing. This trend could be further supported should there be more developments that would raise doubt on the stability of the dollar. The diversification of reserves may bring about a shift and extension of a multipolar system of currencies, where more currencies will assume important roles in trading and in financing. This could probably lead to higher volatility of the separated currencies as a system moves to a new equilibrium. Changes in international trade patterns. Changes in international trade patterns. While the countries try to avoid dealings that require the use of dollar as the medium of exchange, we may experience some changes in the international trade. Several nations might begin trading directly with each other using regional currency or other forms of payments, thus reducing the use of the dollar. It could result in the birth of currency unions, where various countries, the above currencies, mostly use for trade with each other. For instance, learning occurs when people tend to engage in bilateral trading, where the euro is used between Europe and Africa, or the use of the renminbi among Asians. Impact on global financial markets. Impact on global financial markets. Changing away from dollar dominance could result in strong consequences for monetary system of the world. The U.S. alone has enjoyed the privilege to borrow in its domestic currency, which is also the global reserve currency. As has been described by several economists, it is an exorbitant privilege that has enabled the U.S. to maintain current account deficits on a permanent basis, but without having to worry about the outcomes that would be the fate of other countries. The point is that in the case of dollars' reduced importance, the government and corporations of the United States might face the increasing interest rates on their borrowings. It could also lead to fluctuation in U.S. financial markets as they balance for a world that will not default to the dollar as the safe haven currency of choice in the midst of the global crises. Geopolitical implications. In fact, the U.S. dollar has remained as the world's leading reserve currency, and this has been one of America's strongest assets of power in the world. A relative decline of dollar could lead to a lessened influence in the foreign policy, especially in the use of financial power. On the same note, the increase in such arrangements in the international system could make globalization of the currency and financial markets more separated. This could likely lead to a decline in the level of globalization of the global economy and also increase the difficulties of cooperation on economic issues at the international level. Technological disruption. Cryptocurrencies and other forms of digital currencies, such as central bank-issued currencies, CBDCs, are also other aspects that modify the current changes in currencies. These technologies have the possibilities of revolutionizing the international business transactions and the overall monetary policy. Popular examples of such emerging assets include the cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, which afford the opportunity to perform transactions that are outside the central control of governments. Despite their high fluctuation rate, they are not a good form of store of value at the moment, though they represent a threat to the traditional concept of money. CBDCs, on the other hand, have been established to be a plan of the central banks to get their traditional currency into the digital space. The digital yuan of China is the most progressed CBDC project among major economies, which means that its development may create certain effects on the international trade and finance that needs to be unraveled and effectively managed. Here are some key considerations. Diversification. It becomes even more apparent in a more fragmented currency structure, as seen by the following statement. This has not only implications to their investment portfolios, but also to the currencies they use to transact their businesses and hold their reserves. Hedging strategies. As the pressures of globalization might expose currency to more volatility, sound hedging mechanisms will be essential for cross-border undertaking firms to deal with the type of currency risk. Technological adaptation. For instance, business venturers, financial institutions, and investors shall have to work towards the adoption of new payment technologies and digital currencies. It may entail long and costly investments in new systems, as well as skills. Policy flexibility. It is up to policymakers to brace for the future, where their currencies can be replaced by other types of currencies in circulation. This could call for more dynamic activities of monetary and fiscal policies of the economy. International cooperation. Still, it is noteworthy that the trend will lead to the further fragmentation of financial markets. However, international cooperation will remain the key factor in addressing the instability of the global financial environment. This may involve new framework that has the potential of addressing the management of this newer type of currency. Therefore, shifting paradigms of the global currencies are not only threats, but also possibilities. Although the position of the US dollar as the world's key currency seems quite stable in the near future, it is no longer guaranteed. In admitting these present trends and the stories that contextualize them, one can be well equipped should one ever strategize for the future's economic world.